Can solar plants be built in a year and a half? I think in the Philippines, when the policy of build first was put in place and was announced in March of 2015, there were 857 power plants that were built in the Philippines. So I think if we can do it in the Philippines, and with what our speaker has said, with Vietnam, certainly 1.5 is even more time to build the power plant. So as we go to the last, they say that you save the best for last. And in this session, money is what we're going to be talking about. And let me introduce to you the moderator who will lead this discussion. He has been practicing law since 2000, and he's specialized in international banking and finance. He has worked in ASEAN countries, particularly Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, and he has been a very extensive experience in the area of international finance. So please let us welcome Martin Desotel, who will be our moderator for this next session.
Thank you. I'll ask the different panelists to join me on the stage, please. We'll be talking, as just announced, on financing and investing in clean energy project in ASEAN. I'll start first by a short description of our firm for the one who don't know us, and then each panelist will be introducing themselves. I think we have slides, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so just quickly, the FDL, a couple of slides. We are a regional firm, essentially most of ASEAN, and including Bangladesh. Our big specialty is energy. We've been in the region for 20 years. First one to establish in Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar, and Bangladesh as a foreign law firm. About 150 lawyers in 9 countries, 13 offices, about 25 nationality. 2/3 of those are local lawyers, basically. And we've grown with ASEAN, basically. So as ASEAN was developing, we've opened different offices, and I hope by the end of this year I can announce that we'll have an affiliate also in Malaysia. In the Philippines, we have an affiliate for the last 2-3 years who specialize in energy, both solar, wind, and geothermal. So these are the 4 panelists. They've been a last-minute replacement by Surabi. Thank you very much for replacing. One of our panelists was sick and couldn't join. So we'll have 4 panelists, and I'll ask each one of them to present themselves one by one, a couple of minutes presenting. Maybe start by Mason.
Good afternoon. My name is Mason Wallach. I'm the Managing Director of Fund Development. We're an early stage developer based in Southeast Asia, headquartered in Singapore. We have around 25 people. We all sit essentially in the markets in which we develop projects in. That includes Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and last but not least, the Philippines. What's special about Fund Development is essentially our backing. We are supported through Infraco Asia through a developer services agreement. Infraco Asia is a member of the Private Infrastructure Development Group, and we are essentially funded through Infraco Asia by the Swiss, the UK, and the Australian government. So our mandate is quite unique. We take donor funds. We use those funds to invest in high-risk, early-stage developments of our portfolio of projects that we've looked at in the region, which exceeds over $12 billion of opportunities. 80% of those projects are in the renewable sector. We look at projects where we can crowd in the private sector behind us, so we do not look to compete with the private sector, which means considering all the issues that we've heard about earlier today in terms of regulatory risk and uncertainty, is that we have a lot of opportunities that we can look at here. And that's what we spend our time developing throughout the region. So I think that with that, I can pass the mic on for further introductions.
Yes, thank you very much. Swarabi, short introduction, thank you.
Sure. I don't know if there was a slide or not, just because of the last minute addition. But I'm a global investment officer at Sunfunder. Oh, great. So Sunfunder actually started out as a crowdfunding platform 5 years ago. We actually did our first loan here in the Philippines to HSSI. We've now evolved to a $50 million fund backed by OPIC, FMO, and a few other investors, and are raising another fund next year for $100 million. So we lend money to basically any company active in the solar market, as long as you're active in an emerging market. So whether you're a supplier, or distributor, or an EPC contractor. And we do this through a variety of structures. To date, the majority of our portfolios, roughly 60%, has been in the residential solar home system space, and the balance is in commercial and industrial. So as the slide suggests, we've done $30 million worth of loans. That's primarily been in East Africa. We're expanding into West Africa and also looking to come into India and Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas?
I'm Tom Lapham. I'm the CEO of Asia Clean Capital. I don't know if I have a slide here. So we are a Hong Kong-based company, but most of our projects, the vast majority of our projects are in mainland China. We have a number of technologies we invest in, including geothermal, efficient heating and cooling, chilled beams, radiant heat, but 90% of our business activity is in rooftop solar. Our business model is we provide solar panels on the roofs of factories for multinational companies. So Nestle, Coca-Cola, Volkswagen, Danone, Fujitsu, companies like this are our customers. And the way we develop projects is we make 100% of the investment. The client pays nothing. We take care of all of the engineering. We gather up all of the permits. We build the project. We put it into service. And then we provide the electricity directly back to the client, to the factory. And what we do is we peg our electricity price to the grid at a guaranteed discount, regardless of what grid prices do. They go up or they go down. So for example, 10% is the lowest price that we've given. We have some projects up to 30%. And we provide that to the clients for a 20-year contract. We take care of everything in the interim if any of the equipment goes down. China is a country with many huge solar developers who have many gigawatts under management. I think though for our sector, in the sort of high-end multinational rooftop sector, I think we're the biggest developer in China at this point in that particular space. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Ronald?
I'm Ronald from Munich Re. Munich Re is the largest reinsurer. This is not really an introductory slide. I will introduce the company. So we are the largest reinsurer with a large company with around 50 billion euro revenue, 40,000 people. And we focus on all kinds of risks and all kinds of insurances. Of course, especially natural catastrophe insurance, and so on. But in addition, we also look when new technologies arise, such as solar or also other new energies, what kind of risks evolve. And our job is to think about what other unforeseen or sudden losses can happen. And in solar, we have a team which is based in Hong Kong, which has a technology focus, so we focus on the technology risk. So we hear a lot about the development risks today from the developers, a lot of political risks, regulatory risks, also the risks of the feed-in tariff, which you seem to insure somehow. But we look at the maybe even more to the future, because we are in fact building infrastructure projects here, not for only 2 or 3 years, 20 years, they have to perform. And here we see it's more or less mature technology in some eyes of lenders and of investors, but on the other hand, there are still some risks, and they are actually easy to insure, and then we think they are underinsured. So this is actually the slide which I show here. So we have warranty insurance of PV modules. So the technology risk of 25 years can be insured, but most of the time actually it's not. So the suppliers, they provide that insurance. And even if it's insured, sometimes we have really a misconception in the markets. So especially on the left side, you see that people think they are insured, but in fact, this insurance limit is accessible to everybody, and it will be empty in a worst case scenario, whereas other insurances provide insurance limited dedicated to the project owners. This is one message which we would like for you as a takeaway here, that you have a dedicated limit of insurance if you want to mitigate that risk.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction. All day we've heard country by country panels or presentation. We'll try here to have a more comparative regional approach, both comparative within ASEAN, but also we have people who've worked outside ASEAN, so we'll get their advice on comparing what's happening within ASEAN, what they've heard today. The different challenges and risks that they have today in comparison to the maybe elsewhere in the world. As a first question, and maybe start by Mason, I understand Infunde works and looks at different markets. One is renewable energy. If you look at the ASEAN market, what would be the 2 or 3 more hot market that you're more focusing on presently?
Sure. I think that the hottest market that we're working on right now is Vietnam, and it's essentially for all the reasons that we've just heard from Oliver. So we have a barbell approach, looking at small projects below 30, and then we look for the home run on the bigger projects where we actually have to spend more time with the Prime Minister. So that'd be kind of the hot market right now for us, would be Vietnam in the renewable space. Second to that would actually be Indonesia. We've heard about some of the regulatory changes earlier today, although we think it is a bit difficult and a challenge. When we think about solar and battery storage, and depending who you speak to, 14 or 15,000 islands, that for us that's a good opportunity that we're following up on now, despite the challenges. So those would be some of the 2 leader countries right now.
Okay, perfect. And Thomas, you told me you started looking at ASEAN after developing quite well in China. Where are the first stops you started looking?
Yeah, so because we're in distributed and all of our projects are connected to clients, and our clients have projects all over the world, we have had them, starting to ask us, well, can you come to Vietnam? Can you come to Thailand? Can you come to the Philippines? And I guess I'm going to agree with our panel speaker there. We've spent the most time looking at projects in Vietnam. Our view had been that we were thinking about some of the changes that are coming around with the PPAs to make them more bankable, and should we wait until there's sort of perfect clarity on how that's going to happen. But then you also have to consider, if you wait that long, is the opportunity going to be sort of past, and those who have been in earlier are going to sort of establish themselves in the market. I guess I would agree with our earlier speakers.
And Ronald, where do you see most demand within ASEAN for different service that you offer on your side?
Yeah, so for this insurance of projects. We see it all over, so all over the world. In fact, we do it. So especially if there's project finance involved. So if the lenders are more risk averse, then they will ask for different covers. We also see tenders now, especially out of India often. Tenders have such requirements without specific, sometimes tailor-made insurances. They cannot be won, these tenders. So, yeah, this depends from country to country, and especially on the financing scheme and the local banks involved.
And within ASEAN, what do you say that you see the growing demand for your services?
So, for us, it's at the moment India. It's not really ASEAN, but India is for us the largest market, also because of tenders and maybe the risk averseness of Indian projects. And yeah, we have also projects in Thailand, insured projects in Thailand, where the banks ask for this kind of risk mitigations.
Thank you. And what about what we say the smaller market like Cambodia, Laos, or a new growing market like Myanmar? Do you have any interest in these markets? Is there any potential there?
There's absolutely a lot of potential, and I think in terms of the rooftop space, C&I perspective, Cambodia has some good opportunities. Just like every other country, there's regulatory hurdles and issues. We think Myanmar, Bangladesh also offer opportunities as well. So we continue to look in these smaller markets, and we think that there are opportunities. It sometimes just requires a little bit more effort.
Okay. Maybe if we change the subject, Sorabi, you're coming from, your firm has developed elsewhere, several projects from elsewhere. When you come here in ASEAN, and you hear all these different regulatory risk raised today, what first thing that you're looking for in terms of these components, what would you see as a changes, for example, in Vietnam or here, in terms of is it improvement of the PPA, improvement of feed-in tariff, tax and land incentive? What are you looking at usually at first?
So as I said before, Sunfunder basically started in Kenya and Tanzania and the East African market. And it sort of took two different routes. One was being that solar home system for that last mile distribution, and the other was looking at mini grids. What we found is actually the private sector really drove the policy. And as long as the government sees that that their grid is not reaching that area, then the private sector basically could dictate the rules. So from Sunfunder's perspective, we actually tend not to deal with governments and national utilities. So we haven't had to deal with the feed-in tariff issues. We don't have net metering that we're working with. So I think in that respect, we've been lucky in that the private sector really has driven the policy there.
Do you see that potential here, that same approach here in ASEAN of having a private sector driving and not having, because most of the risks raised were related to governmental issues, and so do you see that same potential in ASEAN?
Yes, and I think one of the key things I should say is when we're financing projects, they're under 5 megawatts. And so particularly when you're talking about the islands in Indonesia or in Philippines, if you let the private sector drive those projects, I definitely think, I think there was a lot of talk this morning about a lack of financing. I do think the capital is there. It is just being able to understand the risks and understanding the technology that's being put in place. And if it starts in the outskirts and the projects appear successful, I think you'll actually see that come in more and more to the center. Again, back in East Africa, that's sort of what's happened, where it started out in rural areas, and now we're actually seeing more rooftop solar coming into central Nairobi.
Just a reminder, you can still send your questions to the text, and I'll see the questions that are coming up. So don't hesitate to send your question while we're speaking. On the same issue, Thomas, could you elaborate also on your approach and what you would see? What are the key factors for you to decide to go to Vietnam or to come to Philippines or to go to another country in ASEAN?
Sure. So our approach is really to invest in projects that are directly connected to a client and to a building. And so we've done to date all rooftop projects. We haven't done any ground-mounted or utility-scale projects. And since we, especially, our thought had been in China that there was sort of a history of utility-scale projects that were experiencing curtailment, that were experiencing delays. And if you're selling directly to a client, you know how much electricity they need, you know what your risk profile of the client is. And so that's how we built up our portfolio. So as we move to other countries, really our perspective is to think of it from the client's point of view, which is to say, is the thing that we're offering you something that's going to be attractive commercially? Not just attractive because maybe you've got a sort of internal program where you're looking to reduce your carbon footprint, but attractive from the sense that you can actually save something on your operating costs. And if you can check that box, then it's pretty easy to go into a client and talk to their CFO or talk to their sustainability officer, and they may be thinking, well, we've got this carbon reduction goal by 2020. How much am I going to have to spend to reach it? And you can say, well, you're not going to have to spend anything to reach it. We'll make the investment for you, and we'll actually guarantee savings through the life of the project. So, we do look for places where we can create an economic incentive for the client, rather than just selling back to the grid and having it be a completely sort of disjointed approach. We think it makes the most sense where you're producing electricity, where you know the electricity needs to be used, and you're making an economic contribution to the actual off-taker themselves.
So if I understand as long as the legal environment allows you that the description of the structure that you put in place, and you have your factories, then the condition could be in place for you to enter any country that present these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're very much focused on trying to do projects that make sense on the merits of the project, not projects that only make sense because there's maybe some temporary incentive in place, and once that's gone, maybe the project's not going to pencil out. Because if you're putting in a project and you're making an investment for 20 years, and a few years later policies change, your client's going to find every way that they can to stop paying you if they can stop paying you. But if you're guaranteeing them an economic benefit by using your power, that is, that they're getting power from you at rates that are better than where they could get power somewhere else, you're insulated from that problem, because they would always rather take your power than they would take power from somewhere else.
There's a question that has come up. I had a question related to that, but it was a bit the opposite, so maybe we can put up the question. So many ASEAN governments are facing fiscal deficit and lack of financing strength to push through all the incentive or fiscal program. What is the solution? My question was more, how can we get more government support? That seems to point in the opposite direction. Maybe Mason, you can try to answer that question.
Well, firstly, I think that it's a good question, but secondly, we're dealing in emerging markets. And I think that it's important to realize, essentially, that these grid owner-operators and SOEs have never had money. And what they're trying to do is to bootstrap an economy to grow quickly. And it's our job as a developer, from our perspective, to help them get there. And that's with affordable electricity, to actually bring electricity to the poor as well, and to drive down that cost. So I think that it's the mindset first. So secondly, if we look at that, and if, at least from the development side and looking at the financing side, is to actually take a good look at the power supply dynamics inside that country. So I think that this question could really apply towards Indonesia as well as Vietnam, where I think the Philippines maybe not so much because of the regulatory regime. And in each of these countries, I believe that if you're looking at these power markets the right way, in each island the right way, where you're interconnecting the right way, that you could take a step back and say, well, actually, they are running in deficit. But to reach the objectives and the growth targets, and that they're not likely are going to fall on their face, so to speak, that you can make an investment case for equity. Debt is a little bit harder, and that is where it's going to take a challenge and a specific way forward with lenders depending on the size of the project. So my view is that I would like to see the project stand up economically in their own 2 feet, and that includes without feed-in tariffs, et cetera, and to try and meet that challenge that the market requires. And I think if that can be done, particularly over the short to the medium term, you're going to find the liquidity that you need, and you're going to have a more robust economy, and you won't have the fallback issues of financial strength and fiscal deficits, which, by the way, in most countries are reducing over time, which is a good thing.
Okay. And maybe you want to, okay. Ronald, maybe I can ask you, related to that, to address the different risks you've heard today, including, in some cases, lack of governmental support, what kind of either insurance or the type of product that developer or financier could think of taking, both to address these lack of governmental support in some cases?
Yeah, so as I said before, we mainly focus on the technology risk, and some, especially emerging markets, could be, they don't have so much experience with the technology, so such an insurance can help. I think, as I said before, the basic of the technology risk is the module supplier, is the module technology itself. So we see now a lot of, and I think that's good if we see local suppliers coming. So I think Vietnam is probably the new hub, except of China, or a lot of companies moving not out of China but expanding into China. There are also local Vietnamese companies. There are Thailand developers. In Philippines, we know, of course, the Solar Philippines. So these local content can also give value to local projects. But of course, are they bankable or not? So this is then a big question. So, and then again, warranty insurance is not the only thing that makes a module bankable, but it's one key feature at least. So that can help. So in addition, if we have this fundamental risks of technology mitigated, we see by us and other insurers also offering something that goes up to yield insurance, something like a revenue insurance, but especially like total performance of the park, sometimes including lack of sun. So if it's necessary or not, it can be debated, but some lenders would for sure like that, and others don't.
Okay. Just change the subject here. It's been discussed a lot today, is that, and we're seeing this in Vietnam, is that most solar projects seem to be developed in cooperation with local partners. You can develop 100%, but a lot of investors are taking the route of teaming up with local developers who have good contact at the provincial level, like noted by Olivier. And so what's your view? Maybe start by Mason. What's your view on teaming up? Do you favor this? What are the drawbacks? What the advantage of going and teaming up? Here in Philippines, you don't have the choice to team up with, and in other countries, you have the choice. Some you don't have the choice. But what are the pros and cons, I would say?
Sure. I would say in a lot of the countries that we deal with, firstly, we have the capacity to do self-development, and that includes here in the Philippines. Also in Vietnam, I would argue with our team that we can do a lot of the heavy lifting, and the same goes in Indonesia as well as Laos and Cambodia. So for us, it's not a matter of competency, it's a matter of choice. And what we like to do is to lead the projects that we develop, take majority equity stakes, and to drive them forward. What we generally rely on our local partners for are tasks that they're well suited to provide. So if they do have a good concession and a good site, then that is of value. If they believe they can assist us through permits and approvals in a fair way, we will be going along with them to ensure that those get done appropriately, but that is of value to us. So we think that there's a value proposition of a local partner, but I think that what we've taken is actually a development approach where we have people on the ground in every country, where we speak the language and we know the sector, so that when we work with a local partner, we work with them as a partner, where we both have our own value proposition and we're pretty clear on what that is, so that we can drive home the project together as a team. And in that regard, I think that we try not to rely too much on our local partners and to make sure they don't get stretched. And we would like to be their sounding board in a fallback position for expertise as well. So I think that that is a different mindset than a traditional developer framework that would be going in as an international developer, but it's one that works for us.
Okay, just a follow up on this. A lot of our clients are asking, so how do I choose my local place? How do I identify? Or do you know some? Like the question that was asked to Olivier. How do you go about? Does your local team help on this? How do you go about in finding, for example, here it's a long country. You might want to develop in the south. Some country, or in Vietnam, from the north to the south. It's as long as Italy. Myanmar is a huge country also, and often you need people on the ground who know where you're going to develop your project. So how do you go about in finding these good local developers?
Sure. Well, firstly, we place the relationship with our local partners actually above the project strength. So we believe that all projects are difficult to develop. We want a partner that's going to be there with us through the different risks to see it through. So it's the partner more than the project to start. Secondly, in terms of choosing a partner, we apply a very high standard. We generally work with a lot of blue chip companies. That's here in the Philippines as well as in Vietnam and Indonesia, many of which are publicly listed. So we do look essentially for a very, very high bar for governance. And for us, it's incredibly important that we develop projects to a world-class scale. And what we want of our partners is to embrace in that strategy to develop projects to the best standard as possible. So that's one of the elements that we use when we work with our local partners, is that they understand where we sit in terms of governance and the quality at which we want to develop our projects in terms of risk management, procurement guidelines, et cetera. So those are some of the key factors for us that we think bring success, particularly when it comes time for financing.
And Thomas, we've discussed a bit earlier on choosing local partner. Do you agree with some of the statements Mason that you should look at your partner before the project? And when we never know how a relationship, it's a long relationship, marriage, it's 20 years, for example, if you prepare a project. How do you, once you've chosen, say, okay, this is how do you ensure that you are, I would say, protected, or that your rights will be protected against if something eventually would not go well with the local partner?
Sure. So historically, we had been pretty averse to using local partners because we were developing these distributed projects that are all connected to customers. We viewed the customer relationship as the most valuable sort of piece of the equation. The rest of the items could be argued that they're sort of commodities, whether it's the engineering or the equipment. But the relationship with the client was what we put at the center. And because most of our clients, the average is about 15 to 20 China alone, if you can get one client, you can get quite a large number of projects. But then when you sort of start growing and you go from doing a few dozen to 100 plus megawatts a year, and for us our average project size is about 5 megawatts, and then you get to doing 100 megawatts is 20 projects a year, 200 megawatts we've finished this year is 40 projects. You're doing a project per week. You're going to have a huge sales force if you want to maintain that number of projects. So you eventually have to start using partners if you want to continue growing. And what we've found when selecting partners, and I agree with everything that was just said, you've got to select partners who are going to have good corporate governance and are going to care about quality. But what we found is also making sure that they're tied in with long-term incentives for the project performance, not having their incentives just tied to CapEx or simply, a reduction in CapEx is going to be an extra dollar in their pocket. You want to set something up where it's production-based, based on the quality. And then I would also say that if you're sort of thinking about two different approaches, where maybe on the extreme of one approach you're saying, I'm going to divide every single bit of this project up and get the, the engineering done here and get the permitting done there and do that and add up all those pieces and I can get something cheaper than just giving a single price to a partner who I trust. We found actually giving a single price to a partner you can trust and letting them take care of those things ends up for better results, because what will happen is there'll be some problem along the chain, and if the main person you're working with, that hasn't been put in their scope, they're going to be able to use that as an excuse for why things are delayed or why things are, you're experiencing cost overruns, where if you give a package and you say, okay, you've got to take care of all of this, we found better results with that approach.
You wanted to add something?
I was going to, but I think you've just said all the things I was going to say, that, relationship matters, absolutely. But also for us, like coming in new to the market, we're going to be talking to our colleagues to really see what your reputation has been. What is your track record? And we truly believe that having that familiarity with that local market means a lot. So you don't have to be a local developer. You can be a foreign developer. But you have to have a track record or really understand what that, the intricacies of that market. I think that those are just fundamentals from our perspective when we're first even looking at analyzing whether we would provide debt or not.
Okay. Yeah, I often said the past will tell you how the future is. So look at the past of your partner, and it will tell you how he will be with you. If he had several disputes in the past with his foreign partner or other partners, it could be an indication of how it will go in the future. That's usually what it's not a legal advice, but it's a commercial advice we tend to give to our client. Passing to financing, in fact, we have another question related to financing. And maybe, Suhaib, you can answer this because it's more related to funding of true other than debt financing, other than bank financing. The question is, what is the advantage of funding companies compared to bank financing here in the Philippines? And do funding companies have lower interest rates?
Well,
so if somebody comes to see you, what do you answer to that question?
The simple answer is no. We don't have cheaper interest rates, but I think we have a better understanding of the sector and the market, and we tend to move a lot faster. So for our personal, all of the deals that we've closed them in an average of about 4 months. And we rely on the assets. We use traditional banking methodology, and we apply that to this sector. I don't think a lot of the commercial banks are necessarily ready for that. We hear a lot about corporate guarantees, parent company guarantees, personal guarantees. I've even heard a bank say, I want you to pay all the interest up front. So to me, that's a clear signal that the banks don't necessarily understand the market, whereas we do. So I think the conditions that we would impose are not restrictive. They're more market-oriented. And so while we might be more expensive, I think funding companies are much more flexible and have a lot more knowledge of this specific sector. Will that be forever? I don't think so. But for now, for the next few years, I think there is a significant advantage to working with us.
Okay. Is it safe to say that you'll accept certain risk that a traditional bank, even a local bank, would not accept?
I think absolutely, because I think we have a better understanding of those risks. So whether it's technology or revenue, even in the pay-as-you-go solar home system sector, we started doing securitization of receivables for those companies, because we take the time to really understand what that market is. So I think from that perspective, we are well ahead of the local banks.
Okay. Mason, may you want to also answer that question or comment the question?
Absolutely, at least having been involved in a number of project financings, is that in the case of renewables, I think that it's important for the ecosystem that we take note of the various ways that you can fund your project. And it's not always about the interest rate, particularly if your soft costs to arrange that debt facility are $1 million on up in terms of the advisor costs. And if that time period takes you an additional 6 months, that's a hit on your IRR. So in a lot of the analysis that we do, we think that renewables and solar is very ripe for different methods of financing, which could be seen as EPCF to at least get you through, say, the first year of operation and then term out through term loan, or to essentially see what you can do to really push the envelope for financing. So I think that essentially, while it'd be nice to look in the past, that is the way that financing has been, that we do need to be quite constructive looking forward, that there could be more efficient ways, particularly when you look at the time element that's involved for raising your financings, debt and equity.
Okay. There's another question which is related, I'll ask Thomas to start on this one. The question is, how bankable are rooftop projects given that the off-takers have no sovereign guarantees, often granted to utility-scale solar?
We look at a number of factors, but the first and by far the most important thing we look at is who is the client. We've done a lot of projects for Coca-Cola. They're a great client. They've been around for a long time. They'll probably still be around for a long time. But then beyond that, you have to look at when was the factory built? Is the factory 20 years old and due to be upgraded? And what are they producing there? Are they producing their most popular beverages, or are they producing some less popular beverages there? So you have to go a little bit beyond the client, but then you also have to think about the sector. And so if you think, well, food and beverage, we do a lot of food and beverage. Why is it that Coca-Cola has 42 plants in China? Why don't they just have one giant plant in the middle and send them out across the country? Well, the reason is because it's expensive to ship liquid, and so they're distributed around the country, and they're very unlikely to move and consolidate because each one supplies a core use of users. If you look at other industries, one that we don't invest in is textiles. So we had Nike ask us to invest in a plant that they had in Guangdong. And we said no, because we thought they're a wonderful company, we love their credit, and we'd be happy to do a deal with them. But what happens if 2 years after we signed the deal, they close the factory and move to Vietnam? So we think about not just the creditworthiness of the client, but we think about the likelihood of them to move their operations somewhere else. And then you also have to think about the macro situation. So, what cities, what geographic regions are you looking at? Is it an area of high population that's growing? What are the macro inputs that are going to affect the likely cost of power in the future? Is it somewhere that it's in a remote area and people are leaving there to go to the main cities? Well, maybe that's going to have a downward pressure on power prices, and usually those are the same areas that have a lot of traditional coal production or other things that are going to make the prices tend to go down over time. So you'll look at that, and then you'll obviously look at your irradiation, your sunlight hours, and you'll have to kind of consider those I guess 3 factors: the client credit worthiness, the likelihood that the factory, if it's a rooftop, is going to be there for a long period of time, and then what's the geographic environment. And if you can demonstrate that those 3 things assure that it's likely, that it's extremely likely that the off-taker will be there for the term of the agreement, we've not found any trouble getting banks or other financial institutions to want to finance those kind of deals.
Okay, good. I've been told we're ready to go for the cocktail. So I want to thank the audience for their question, and thank you very much for the 4 panelists.
Thank you very much, Martin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our day one session. It's been a very enlightening and very enriching day for the first day of this conference. And you have been very, very patient. You have been prompt coming into the session on time. And also, we're very thankful for all of the speakers, the moderators, the panelists, and most of all, the delegates who have stayed until this late hour with their questions and with their alertness on the presentation. So thank you very much. And tomorrow we will see you at the separate parallel session for solar and battery. So in behalf of the organizer, the Leaders Associate, the Philippine Solar Power Alliance, the Asian PV Industry Association, thank you again. And I'd just like to ask the organizer to give the details of the cocktails as we wind down our day on this first day. Coco, please.
Yes.